Hello there, hello, welcome. Bit of a different backdrop. I've still got a lot of cables to sort out back there, so just ignore that please. What I wanted to do in this video is talk about Synapse Analytics source control. One of the issues with source controlling a Synapse workspace is that the Synapse workspace artifacts themselves, like SQL scripts, pipelines, linked services, all that stuff, is separate to the SQL pools. So dedicated and serverless. In this example, I'm going to be using a serverless SQL Pools database. Essentially, you've got to treat those two as separate items to source control, which is a little annoying. However, with the latest updates to Azure Data Studio, we've got support for serverless SQL Pools databases. So I'm going to show you an example of a solution that I think works in terms of trying to get both a Synapse workspace and SQL Pools source controlled together. So I'm going to jump into my Synapse workspace. And I'll just show you that I've got a pipeline. It's just a very simple pipeline, just to show that there is a pipeline there. And I have a SQL Pools database, a serverless SQL Pools database, where I've got an external table, I've got a view, and I've got a connection to a data lake data source. The upshot is I've got a SQL script, and I can just select from that remote Parquet data. Now the thing is though, this database just exists in this SQL Pools. This is a development instance. If I then wanted to promote changes to UAT live, I've got to deploy some scripts. I've got to deploy a project. We can do that in Azure Data Studio. Firstly, what I'm going to do is I've got a Git repo that I already created in Azure DevOps. You can do this in GitHub as well. Completely empty repository that I've created, just called Synapse Shared Dev. Nothing there. If I go back to Synapse and go to my Manage tab, I'm going to configure the connection to the repo. So go into Git configuration, configure, and I'm in DevOps. So there we go. I'm going to select DevOps and select my organization name. I've got a project. Finally, going to get to the repo. So let's see if it just shows me the Synapse shared development. And I'm just going to collaborate on the main branch. Keep everything as default, really. And I'm going to import the existing Synapse resources, so the script, the pipeline, the linked services, into the main branch. So this is like the initial setup in terms of me connecting this workspace to DevOps. So let me apply that. Take a few seconds to run through. And essentially what it'll be doing is it'll be connecting to DevOps and pushing the artifacts from the Synapse workspace into the repo. So let's go back to the repo, refresh. There we go. And essentially, really, all it is, it's just a bunch of JSON, right? So there we go. So the SQL scripts, for example, they're not actually stored as SQL. They're stored as SQL within JSON, right? So there we go. There's my pipeline. The upshot is I've now connected my Synapse workspace to source control. I can branch it. I can create a pull request. Great. What about the databases? And again, this is just me working through a solution that I think works very well. I'm going to create a folder in the root of the Synapse directory. And I'm going to call it SQL Pools Projects. Okay, let's just add a README file. Okay, and I'll just say folder for SQL Pools database projects. All right, so let me just commit that. My face is probably covering the commit button down the bottom right hand side. There we go. I've just added a folder to the repository that Synapse has been synchronized to. Now Synapse, just going to ignore that SQL Pools projects folder. It doesn't know what it is. It has no objects for it. So that folder can just sit there. However, the cloning feature from within Synapse is just going to clone the repo, including that folder. So if I switch to Azure Data Studio, one thing to note with Azure Data Studio is you need to be on minimum 1.4.6. So it's probably, a higher version now. You're going to need that. You're also going to need to go to the extensions, search for database projects. There we go, got database projects there. Install it if it's not already installed, and make sure that it's version 1.3.1. That's the version that adds in, well, Fabric warehouses as well as Serverless SQL Pools. So from here, I'm going to clone that repo that I created from the Synapse Workspace. So if I go into my source control tab and clone the repo, now I've got to switch back to the repo and get the repo URL. So I'm just going to click on the repo itself, going to click clone, and then copy the HTTPS URL. Go back to Data Studio, clone the repository, enter in the remote URL for DevOps. It's going to ask me where do I want to put it, so I'm going to put it in. So what I'll do is I'm just going to delete that. I'm going to put it here in my demo folder, and that's going to clone the repo, and if I click open, it'll open the repo in Data Studio. So from here, if I click on Explorer, then in that folder, oh actually let's so in the folder we've got the objects cloned down that we pushed in from Synapse. So back in Data Studio, what we can now do is create a database project. So I'm just going to go into Database Projects, Create New, select the SQL Server database project, and then in this target platform, I've got Synapse Serverless SQL Pools. I've got dedicated, I've now got serverless, and there's also data warehouse. We'll deal with that in a separate video. So we've got Serverless SQL Pools. The database is called SQL Web Telemetry Analysis, and I'm just going to browse through and put it in that SQL Pools project folder. Click Create, which will be hidden by my face down the bottom right hand side, and we've got a database project. So what we can do is let's go and get the database from the Synapse Workspace. So I'm going to do the schema compare. So I'm going to right click the database project, because under schema compare what I can do is I can just select what I'll do is I'll just cancel that, switch direction. I'm going to select the connection to the serverless SQL pool. I've already set the connection up, so I'm going to select my database, click connect, and then just make sure that the database here is set to the web telemetry analysis. The target is the database project. I'm just going to keep the defaults and click compare. So now it's going to get down, well, the view, the schema, the database credential, for the managed identity, basically all of the serverless SQL Pools objects that I created in that workspace. Let's click apply. And now it's going to go through, update the project, and well, there we go. So I've got my external table, my views, the schema, the managed identity, scoped credential, everything that I need for my serverless SQL Pools project. And it's under source control. So let me go into source control and I'll put initial serverless SQL Pools commit. Okay. And I'm going to sync the changes with the repo. Let me just get rid of these messages down here. So we've source controlled the database in the repo that we synchronized Synapse to. So let's flick to the repo itself. Just refresh that. And well, there we go. There's my database project that I've source controlled. So what's the point of doing this? Right? Let's flick back to the Synapse workspace. I'm developing. I come along. I create a new branch. Create a new branch. I'll call it dev branch Andy. I'm going to create that off the main branch. Now I've got a branch of the code, so I can work on workspace artifacts, pipelines, scripts, etc. If we go to the repo and if we look at the branch I've created, well, there you go. It's got a copy of that folder. It's got a copy of that database project. So I can go into Data Studio, and from within Data Studio, let's say I want to fetch. So I'll do that fetch first, and then I'm going to check out to my dev branch. Okay, so in that bottom left-hand corner, I'm now in my dev branch here. So if I did want to go into my database project, and let's say I want to take the existing view, so I'm going to take this view here, I'm just going to create another one. So I'll right click, I'll click add table, oops, not table, view. So add a view, right, and I'll call that VW dim products red, for example. Let me just get rid of all that. And let's say it's product color like red. It's a new view. What I'll do is I'll build the project, make sure the project builds okay. So I'm just going to right click, click build. As a side note, there we go. Oh, it's failed. So let's have a perfect opportunity to see one of the problems I had before. You've got to save. Yeah, you've got to save the new object, then click build. Right, so validated the project model, build succeeded. We're all good. So we've got our new view. I've kept it simple. It's source controlled. So I'm going to, I say add a new view for red products. Okay, I'll commit, I'll sync changes with the repo. So that's going to push it up to DevOps. So let's have a look at that. So flick back to DevOps. And let's have a look in the pools database and DBO views. Well, there we go. There's our red view. Now, what if I wanted to make Synapse changes? So go into my Synapse workspace. Let's say I go into integrate and I want to create a new pipeline. Actually, what I'm going to do is, to save time, I'm just going to clone the existing pipeline. So let's clone that. I'll call that wait 10 seconds. Obviously, I'll parameterize it, but here we go. Wait for 10 seconds. But we've got a new pipeline, right? So we've changed both the schema of a Serverless SQL Pools database, but also the Synapse workspace itself in terms of a new pipeline. Right, so what I'll do is I'll commit that to the repo. Click OK. Yep, successfully committed to the GitHub repository. Notice that we don't actually have that new view in the SQL pool. So let's go back to Data Studio and deploy it. Let's go back to the database project, right click, publish. Let me select the database, click connect, and I'm just going to click publish down the bottom right hand side. So again, it's going to build the project, and look, a DAC pack. So we're deploying a DAC pack. It's been successful. Let's go back, refresh our view. There we go. There's our view. Right, so I'm just going to select from the products. And of course, you can put in place any deployment methodology that you want in terms of your Synapse artifacts and your database projects. But for this, to my mind, being able to source control the database project and the Synapse workspace together and use the branching functionality within the Synapse workspace, it's pretty useful, I find. So from there, let's just close that script. Close up my objects, and I want to create a pull request. So I've finished my changes, done my database changes, done my workspace changes. I want to merge those back into the main branch of the repo. And again, look, I can just go up in here, I can create a pull request. So latest Andy dev changes. So if we go into files, right, so we've got the pipeline, we've got the database project artifacts there as well, got everything we need. And I'm just going to click create down the bottom there, and I'm going to complete that pull request. Yeah, I can delete the dev branch after merging. Click complete merge down the bottom right hand side. I'll squash the commit in that the multiple commits that I've got, I just want one commit when I merge it back into the main branch. Go back into the repo, and yeah, we've got our main branch. SQL Pools project. Let's have a look. Yeah, we've got our two views there. And in our pipeline, we've got our second pipeline. There's a link to the written blog on this, which goes into a little bit more detail about what we're doing for each step. But like I said, I've kind of found this very useful in being able to source control the pools database projects and the Synapse artifacts at the same time, helped out by the fact that we now have the SQL Pools or the Serverless SQL Pools projects available within Azure Data Studio. So if you've enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing. Got some more to come. I alluded to the fact that might be looking at Fabric warehouses. Yes, we are going to be looking at Fabric warehouse integration using Azure Data Studio, but in a context of looking at Fabric warehouses in general. So that video is going to be coming soon. Anyway, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.